When Eddie Condon talked about Bix Beiderbecke, it was different. Eddie was one of the musicians who had played with Bix. They all were his disciples. Condon wrote about hearing Bix's cornet for the first time. Beiderbecke took out a silver cornet. He put it to his lips and blew a phrase. The sound that came out was likened to the feeling when a girl says yes. He played with precise, at times almost fussy articulation, and a rounded, chime-like tone. The sound of Bix's horn is different. It's a fat sound, broader and less strident, darker and more mellow than the others. Author Fred Turner said, "He became one of the true sensations of the jazz age, unforgettable to anyone who ever heard him play." Part of Bix's appeal, says Turner, derives from the way he lived. Here was a handsome young man whose frenetic pace matched that of the new music he helped create. When fans took him out, they found he liked the things they liked, especially prohibition alcohol, which he could consume in enormous quantities. With the aid of booze, said Eddie Condon, he drove away all other things: food, sleep, women, ambition, vanity, and desire. He played the cornet, and that was all. But in the end, despite his brief fame, despite his ghastly death, there remains this beautiful sound he made and left behind. Bix Beiderbecke grew into a jazz legend because he was born in the right place at the right time. Sure, he was also a gifted musician, but his path to the top as one of the greatest jazz cornet players was fueled by the inspiration he drew from hearing the earliest jazz musicians play on records and on riverboats. The son of Bismarck Herman Beiderbecke and Agatha Jane Hilton was born on March 10, 1903, in Davenport, Iowa. There is disagreement over whether Beiderbecke was christened Leon Bix or Leon Bismarck and nicknamed Bix. The son of German immigrants, Beiderbecke's father was a well-to-do coal and lumber merchant. Beiderbecke's mother was the daughter of a Mississippi riverboat captain. He was a musical prodigy, which didn't hurt. The Davenport Daily published an article in 1910 raving about a 7-year-old's ability to play a tune just by listening to it. As a teenager, Bix was captivated by the music of the original Dixieland Jazz Band, the New Orleans-based outfit that is usually credited with making the first jazz recording. Bix would fire up the Victrola and listen to the songs over and over until he could play the tunes just like the band did. At first he copied their tunes on his piano, then with a cornet that he had borrowed. On April 22, 1921, a month after he turned 18, Beiderbecke was arrested by 2 Davenport police officers on an accusation that he had taken a 5-year-old girl into a neighbor's garage and committed a lewd act with her, a statutory felony in Iowa. According to the police, the girl accused Beiderbecke of putting his hands on her person outside of her dress. The police went on to state that Beiderbecke and the girl were in an auto in the garage, and she screamed, attracting the attention of 2 young men who were across the street. The young men went over to the garage, and the girl ran home. Beiderbecke was arrested and released after a $1,500 bail bond was posted. The girl's father requested that the grand jury drop the charge to avoid harm that would result to her in having to testify. And in September 1921, the grand jury returned no indictment, whereupon the county attorney filed a dismissal of the case. It was 4 months later, probably in an informal deal with the authorities, that Beiderbecke left Davenport for Lake Forest Academy near Chicago, a quasi-military prep school intended for well-to-do boys. Formal schooling was never a priority for Bix. It's not a stretch to say that he valued experiences over lectures. Even though his grades were poor, his music skills improved, thanks to the easy access to nearby speakeasies and their talented musicians. He also traveled to the predominantly African-American South Side to listen to what he called real jazz musicians. He stayed out late, playing music and drinking, which inevitably led to an early exit from school. When the arrest finally did come to light, the possibility that Beiderbecke may have committed a sex crime sparked a furious and ongoing debate among scholars, fans, and enthusiasts. It is said that Beiderbecke was tortured by lifelong guilt over this episode. Whatever the specifics, there can be little doubt that he was deeply ashamed of the arrest, which the Beiderbecke family covered up for many years. Shame of this nature might well help to explain Beiderbecke's alcoholism, and certainly appears to explain his long-standing problems with intimacy. Aside from a habitual unwillingness to be emotionally forthcoming with his friends, he is known to have had only 2 physical relationships with other adults, one of them a woman and the other a man. The latter was not disclosed until 1974, and given the stigma attached to homosexuality during that era, this, too, may have been more than his Iowa upbringing had prepared him to accept. Beiderbecke's downward spiral into uncontrollable alcoholism is amply documented, and the story is a sad one. The more he drank, the less confidence he had in his ability to play well, and so he drank still more to overcome his growing fear. As a result, his friend Bing Crosby would recall, he generally felt pretty bad, so much so that if anybody asked him, "How do you feel?" he answered, "I don't ask you how you feel. Why do you ask me how I feel? Just leave me alone." As Bix grew into his late teens, riverboat nostalgia was on the rise. The excursion business was booming along the Mississippi and Ohio rivers. Day trippers dressed up for a few hours of dining, dancing, and connecting with an imagined riverboat past. One of the regular stops was Davenport, Iowa, where young Bix heard music floating across the water and would later answer its call. One of those boats provided the setting for the first meeting between Bix and Louis Armstrong, probably in 1920. It's not clear how much the 2 young musicians interacted that first time. Bix would have been around 18 years old and Armstrong just 19, but a letter that Armstrong wrote after Bix's death hints that Armstrong heard Bix play at that early meeting. Regardless, something clicked between the 2. Armstrong wrote that he and Bix became friends right from the start. Bix, though, would go on to find success far away from the river. He formed a band called the Wolverine Orchestra. They played long improv sets at frat houses and college dances, mostly around Indiana University in Bloomington. In February 1924, the Wolverines made their first recordings. In some respects, Beiderbecke's playing was in a class by itself, but he nevertheless listened to and learned from the music around him, from Dixieland jazz to the hotter Chicago style of the New Orleans Rhythm Kings, and the South Side bands of King Oliver and other black artists, to the classical compositions of Claude Debussy and Maurice Ravel. Bix tendered his resignation with the Wolverines in October 1924, leaving to join John Goldkett and his orchestra in Detroit. But Beiderbecke's tenure with the band proved to be short-lived. Goldkett recorded for the Victor Talking Machine Company, whose musical director Eddie King objected to Beiderbecke's modernistic style of jazz playing. After a few weeks, Beiderbecke and Goldkett agreed to part company, at least for the time being. Some 6 weeks after leaving the band, Bix arranged a recording session back in Richmond with some of the Goldkett band members under the name Bix and his Rhythm Jugglers. On January 26, 1925, they recorded Toddlin' Blues and Beiderbecke's own composition, Davenport Blues, which subsequently became a classic jazz number. That summer, he played with his friends at a lake resort in Michigan. The band was run by Goldkett, and it put Beiderbecke in touch with another musician he had met before, Frankie Trumbauer. The two hit it off, both personally and musically, despite Trumbauer having been warned by other musicians. "Look out, he's trouble. He drinks, and you'll have a hard time handling him." They were inseparable for much of the rest of Beiderbecke's career, with Trumbauer acting as something of a guardian to Beiderbecke. In addition to commercial sessions with Goldket, Beiderbecke and Trumbauer also recorded under their own names for the OK label, starting with Clarinet Marmalade and Singin' the Blues, recorded on February 4th, 1927. Again with Trumbauer, Beiderbecke re-recorded Riverboat Shuffle in May and delivered 2 further solos a few days later on I'm Coming, Virginia and Way Down Yonder in New Orleans. In 1927, Bix and Trumbauer joined the Paul Whiteman Orchestra, then the best-known and best-paying outfit in the country. The Whiteman Orchestra was not a jazz ensemble as such, but a popular music outfit that drew from both jazz and classical music repertoires. A number of Beiderbecke friends criticized Whiteman for not giving Bix the opportunities he deserved as a jazz musician, and it was rumored that the heavy touring and recording schedule with Whiteman's orchestra was a contributing factor in Beiderbecke's chronic alcoholism. On November 30th, 1928, while on tour in Cleveland, Beiderbecke suffered a severe nervous crisis, presumably triggered by Beiderbecke's attempt to stop drinking. Beiderbecke returned home to Davenport to convalesce. He then spent the summer in Hollywood in preparation for the shooting of a new talking picture, The King of Jazz. Production delays prevented any real work from being done on the film, leaving Beiderbecke and his pals plenty of time to drink heavily. By September, he was back in Davenport, where his parents helped him to seek treatment. He spent a month at the Keeley Institute in Dwight, Illinois. Bix admitted to having used liquor in excess for the past 9 years, and over the last 3 years he was drinking nearly 3 pints of whiskey every day. Soon after his release, he began drinking again. Although he resumed his musical career briefly, his rapid physical deterioration kept him from returning to the Whiteman Band. He moved back to New York one last time, where he died in his apartment of a severe case of lobar pneumonia, coupled with the effects of long-term alcoholism on August 6, 1931. He was 28. It is sad to know that Beiderbecke had no confidence in the value of his gifts. "I'm only a musical degenerate," he told a fellow musician at the height of his fame. How one wishes he could have known that all of his records would still be in print 3/4 of a century after his death, and that a generation of young listeners would be hearing in them what the trumpeter Max Kaminsky heard when they were brand new. Bix's tone was so pure, so devoid of any tinge of sentimentality or personal ego, that it was the nearest thing to perfect beauty I have ever heard. This is Alexander from One Track Jazz. Go to my channel for more biographies of legendary jazz artists, and thanks for listening.